Good afternoon. My name is John Harris. I'm the editor-in-chief of and co-founder of Politico in Washington and now Politico.eu in Brussels. And welcome to our panel. This was originally entitled The European Disunion. And somebody along the line must have decided that sounded a little downbeat or pessimistic. And so in keeping with the cheerful spirit of this week in Davos, we decided to call it Fixing the European Disunion. Consistent with that, for those of us who are following on Twitter, we welcome that. There's hashtag Fixing Europe. This is live streaming right now on Politico.com, Politico.eu, as well as the World Economic Forum site. So, and thank you especially to the World Economic Forum for the kind greeting that they've given to Politico at this event. I'm going to do very brief introductions because I think this panel, distinguished panel, is going to be have a number of very familiar faces to all of you. We've got Emma Marcegaglia. You can forgive my American pronunciations. Emma Marcegaglia.
Not too bad.
Not too bad. Okay. Thank you. She's chairman and CEO of Marcegaglia Holding. It's an industrial holding company in Italy. We've got, I'm doing this not as we're seated here, but on my list. Pierre Moscovici is the Commissioner for European and Financial Affairs at the European Commission. He's the man in charge of the euro. Joseph Stiglitz, a very familiar person on both sides of the Atlantic, a former Clinton administration chairman of the Bill Clinton's Council of Economic Advisors, a Nobel Prize winner, and somebody who has written frequently on European issues, and specifically the euro. And down there at the far end, we've got Luca Visentini.
Perfect.
We've got two Italians here on our panel, and he is Secretary General of the European Trade Union Confederation. A couple of housekeeping notes. One, we've got cameras there, so if you're walking around, please do be aware of the cameras so as to not block the view of the people watching on live stream. And the other thing I would say is this is a small enough group and it's a vibrant enough topic that we should really have a conversation. We're going to hear from our panelists, but if people want to raise their hands, we're not going to just hold that to the end. I'll try to weave that in throughout. If you see or hear something in real time, just raise your hand and we'll try to get it into the conversation. The one thing I will ask, as I ask at every panel I moderated, let's really have questions or very short comments, no speeches. We've got 45 minutes to cover a lot of ground, so we really want to be concise, and we'll hold ourselves to that same standard. I'd like to just frame this a little bit. I'm a journalist, and one of the great weaknesses of journalists is that we tend to cover politics through the prism of power, who's got it or who's losing it, or we tend to cover politics through the prism of image. What are politicians doing to craft their image? The great American historian, wouldn't surprise me if you knew him, Professor Stiglitz, Arthur Schlesinger Jr., once wrote a rebuke to those of us in my industry. We too often forget that politics at the end of the day is about the search for remedy. People have problems, and power flows to people who can fix those problems. Arthur also wrote a sentence that stuck with me, and I thought of it again with this panel. He said, a major source of the anxiety and frustration that darken the climate of democratic politics is surely the gnawing fear that our leaders are intellectually baffled and analytically impotent before the long-term crises of the age, that they know neither causes nor cures and are desperately improvising on the edge of catastrophe. He wrote that in the Cycles of American History more than 3 decades ago, but there is a certain resonance in this moment where one senses policymakers desperately improvising, and one hopes not on the edge of catastrophe. But I want to start out, if this is about fixing European disunion, let's define the problem, and then we can talk about the remedy. And I'm going to go down the group, and I would ask you if the causes of European disunion you regard as fundamentally emotional and psychological. That is fear of change, fear of immigrants, resentment of bureaucrats, or they're fundamentally material. That is, there are specific things that people are legitimately aggrieved about, and therefore the answer is also material. Specific policy changes that must be addressed. Why don't we start with you?
I'm supposed to represent the European Union here,
okay,
not the European Disunion. I think that, as would have said somebody Stiglitz knows well, it's economy is stupid, basically. Mm-hmm. What people in Europe suffer from, first of all, is too weak growth, too high unemployment, and too much debt. And the result,
anybody would legitimately be angry about that. It's not a matter of prejudice.
There is an economic anger, there is a cultural anger which derives from it, there is a social anger. There is also that phenomenon that exists in the US where some people feel that they are losers from globalization with the change in industry, et cetera, et cetera. There is growing inequalities. And I think that that is the question we must address better, because the rest comes from it. I've been a politician in my life for 20 years as an MP in east of France, a very industrial area where people now vote mostly for National Front. And what do they do so? Because they're on the border, the Swiss border, not so far away from here, and they believe that globalization does not protect them, that Europe does not protect them. So I think, first of all, first question, how can we be more efficient economically? And it's also about the Eurozone, and there I would welcome the debate with Mr. Stiglitz, with maybe slightly different opinion, but I think also there are right questions in what he says about convergence inside the Eurozone. But we've got at least two other problems. The first one is that we need to be more protective to the people about borders, about trade policies, about industrial policy, about social policy, because if people feel they are not secure, then they feel that they need to go back to the past, which is nation borders, national politics, and somewhere populism. And the rest, you talked about bureaucracy. I'm now a member of a little bureaucracy, 33,000 people, but very powerful one, the EU Commission, which is perceived as the prototype of elites that people don't like. And we need to address this issue too, and it's about democracy. How can we be more transparent? How can there be more accountability on what we are doing? For example, and I will stop by that, I represent the European Commission in the Eurogroup, and we discuss about Greece. I think we are doing, all in all, a quite good job about Greece, and the Greek people know it. But it's in the four walls of a room. Nobody can control that, neither a parliament, neither citizens. And so there is the idea that there are few people are ruling for the rest of the EU, and that is not possible. So the three issues are, for me, economic efficiency, protection for citizens, democracy, and accountability. And we need to be, as well, very proud of what we've done. I'm proud of being a European. I think the European Union is solid and that it is a unique model. But I'm also conscious and lucid that there are huge problems, that we are facing major threats, and that we have also enemies, and the populists are our enemies. This commission is a political one, and it's an anti-populist commission, but the way to combat populism efficiently is to be popular. And to be popular, you need to solve issues. It's about delivering, about results.
Professor Stiglitz.
Yeah, so I agree with the beginning, the diagnosis. I think there are many other forces that are contributing to this extreme populism. There are countries that are doing well that still have right-wing movements. So I don't think we should think that it's all economics. But I think the surge of populism has everything to do with economics. And then you have to then say, what has caused the economic plight? And let me just emphasize how bad things are in the United States. Things are much worse than in Europe, but they aren't good in Europe. In the United States, the bottom 90% basically had stagnant income for a quarter century. Real wages at the bottom are as low as they were 60 years ago. So there's real reason for that kind of anger. As I say, it's not as bad in Europe. I think they've gotten things working in many ways better. But Europe as a whole, particularly since the global financial crisis, and the Eurozone in particular, has been near stagnation. And even the well-performing countries would be given a C-, D, D-, and if you weren't grading them on the curve. And it's interesting to hear some of the rhetoric of the finance ministers of some of these well-performing economies. They say, well, when I say relatively well-performing that are really getting a C or D, they're saying, well, we have to get used to slow growth. And you sort of say, why? And then that goes to the question of the diagnosis of what are the problem. Globalization is playing a role, but it's only part. Technology is playing a role. Very hard to think about how you're going to reverse technology, but I do think economic policies shape technology. Why are we innovating in ways to create more unemployment rather than innovating to save the planet? And that's a result of policies. But I think the euro is part of the reason that Europe, the Eurozone, is not doing well. It's only part of the reason, but it's part of the reason. And when you have the kind of rigidity that was created, where you aren't able to change relative exchange rates without creating the institutions that are required to make a single currency work, it's an invitation to problems. We can go through exactly why that is, but let me just try to lay out the landscape. One of the ways that it then translates when you have a single currency, it doesn't have the flexibility to enable the weaker countries like Greece, Italy, Spain to adjust, and the result of that is real problems, depressions, deep recessions, where GDP today in Greece is more than 20% below what it was before the crisis. It's worse than the Great Depression in almost all of these countries. So we have to understand the depth of that, and that will obviously shape the kind of reactions to the politicians and to the euro and the European Union. I do want to agree again that one of the other factors, which I think is very important, is the loss of economic sovereignty, the democratic deficit. When countries signed up for the euro, I don't think most of them understood that they were giving up the degree of economic sovereignty that they were. They didn't understand fully that they might vote in country after country 60% or more for an end of austerity and then be told, I'm sorry, you don't have you've given up your economic sovereignty. That's determined from Brussels or from the Troika. So they feel, in some sense, betrayed by the leaders. And then, making things worse, in many of these countries, there is a weakening of social protection because they're told, look, you have these budget constraints. To live within those budget constraints, you have to give up the kinds of protections you're used to. And so they're starting to think, we were told that globalization and the euro were going to bring us prosperity. We're now seeing it's bringing us a depression. We're being told we have to accept wage cuts. We have to give up social protections. We have to cut back on government expenditures. How is that making us better off? And that leads to, you made this remark about politicians being at the verge of, crisis without knowing where it was going. In this case, the problem started before. Promises were made on both sides of the Atlantic about globalization, about the EU, that clearly haven't been fulfilled.
Right.
Best of intentions, but those promises haven't been delivered, and that causes a growth of distrust in the elites and the kind of disunion that's the subject of this discussion.
Okay.
Ma'am?
Just to tell you, I'm also the president of the European Federation of Industry. I'm not only an entrepreneur. No, just to say that. Okay, so to answer your question, I think it's both. It's economic, but it's also emotional. Just to give a picture, you know Europe represents 7.3% of the world population, represents 27% of the world GDP, represents 40% of the world public expenditure in welfare. So we're still a place where the welfare, maybe we are cutting, but we're still a place where the welfare expenditure is high. I think we have two big problems. The first is that unemployment is still very high. We need to create further 5 million jobs just to get back to the level of unemployment that we had in 2008. So we did some, but we still have a lot to do. And the second problem that Mr. Stiglitz said also before, I think there is still a lot of kind of divergence. In these years, we didn't see a real convergence among countries in Europe. We were seeing this for some years, but now we see more a divergence, and this is a problem. And there is a divergence among countries, and there is also a divergence between different kind of people. So inequality is there, and we have to talk about that and try to understand what to do. And ahead of this, then Europe, we know, has this problem of migration crisis to deal with, has a problem of terrorism attack, have a problem of how to protect its boundaries. So on the top of some problem on the economic point of view, we had also this kind of problem. And I don't want to say this because I'm sure you will ask to us what we think, but above all these things, we have Trump coming there, we have Russia doing something, so all these forces are, in a certain sense, working against Europe. So what we have to, so it's both, it's emotional and it's economic. In my opinion, it's very important that we understand, and now I'm talking as business, I think also as business we have to understand the problems. We have to tackle the problems of inequality. Probably we have also to change the narrative a little bit. We have to understand things, and then we have to have a long vision, but also try to be practical and pragmatic to solve the problems. Otherwise, people will not understand us. And I think, first of all, we have to all together solve the problems of external boundaries management, migration, and in my opinion, on this part, we need more Europe, not less Europe. We don't need disunion of Europe. We need more Europe on this. We need to put together our efforts. And I say something, if some countries are ready to put together the external border management, the migration management, the security management, and others are not, maybe it's time to go further with the countries that want to do this. This is my personal idea. Second, I think we need also at the national level a different kind of investment. We need maybe less welfare as we thought in the past. We need a lot of investment in education. Think about what's going on with digital. Probably we have. I was in another panel this morning, and some people said we have no more than 5 or 6 years to fix the skill gaps. So we need to invest a lot also on this. On the business part, I think in Europe we still need to work on competitiveness because, in my opinion, inequality comes first from unemployment. And to create more jobs, you need competitive companies. So we have still to work on that. But then we have also to share in a better way what we produce. So we have to think about that. And last point, on trade, now everybody is talking about protectionism, closing the boundaries. It's a simple nonsense because we know very well that in the next 30 years, 90% of the growth will come from outside Europe. If we close up, we make a problem to ourselves. So we need to go on with trade, but probably a different kind of trade. A trade, FTA, where you take into account also environmental, social rights, protection. So probably we can go on, we can still have open trade, but also try to have environmental problems and social rights problems tackled in this trade agreement.
The trade issue, I think, does lead well to you, Luca. And I must say, the point you're making is one that it's also resonated in American politics, where free trade used to be treated almost as a religious issue. Which side are you on? And now you see both parties viewing it as much less of a doctrinal issue and more of a pragmatic issue, recognizing that the free trade purism just simply doesn't have an audience in the United States, and increasingly seems not to in Europe as well. Please.
So coming back to your question, what's behind? We have, xenophobia, populism, mistrust in elites, in politicians, but also in social partners and stakeholders, all the ones that are trying to regulate, let's say, the economy, politics, etc., etc. But the point is, what's behind that? If you look at the results of the Brexit referendum, for example, the regions where Brexit prevailed and where even workers voted for Brexit are not the regions in the UK where there are more migrants, are the regions in the UK where there is the higher level of unemployment, the higher level of poverty and social exclusion, and where globalization hit harder. So if, sorry?
The mic is not working.
The mic is not working?
So you maybe project a little more.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Oh, sorry. No, I was saying that in the Brexit referendum, the regions that voted for Brexit and where also our members, the workers, the working people, voted for Brexit, were not the regions where there are more migrants, but the regions where there are the higher levels of unemployment, of social exclusion, of poverty, and where the crisis on the one side, but particularly globalization, better? Yeah. Where particularly globalization hit harder. So it's clear that behind xenophobia, populism, mistrust, there is first of all an economic problem. I think this is really what we should take into account if we want to address the problem. And what was the reaction in Europe, but I think in the US probably the situation is very similar with Trump. The reaction of national politicians in particular in our continent. The reaction, since they were not able to solve and to fix the economic problems behind globalization, they started simply following the sentiments that are really widespread among people, that migrants are the problem, migrants are the enemy, and that you have to try to find a scapegoat when you are not able to provide right solutions and right replies. Doesn't mean that we don't have any hope, in Europe, to try to rebuild up the European project and to try to pass from disunion to a better and different and more progressive and European Union. I'm not so pessimistic. I think we have some opportunities. I'm still convinced that Europe has great potential to change and to become better in the future. We have to recognize that the European institutions tried their best to achieve some results, but the problem is that there is no willingness among the national politicians in particular to participate in a common project with responsibility and solidarity at the same time. So what is really needed is that the politicians should start telling people the truth. For example, welcoming and integrating in Europe a couple of million migrants is not a problem. We have 500 million population in this continent. When we had the former Yugoslavian countries' war in the 90s, middle of the 90s, we integrated in Europe almost 3 million refugees in 1 year. So it's not possible now to integrate 1.5 million Syrian refugees. It's really true that they are the enemy of workers in Europe? I don't think so. I think that, on the contrary, if there is a virtual path for integration and a virtual path to relaunch the economy, if you are able to provide both refugees and native workers with new and better jobs, well, the problem can be really solved. And so, again, and coming back to the major concern of our people, we have to reboost economic growth, sustainable economic growth. Yeah. We didn't do so so far, unfortunately. The economic governance of the European Union was a failure. We have to recognize this. But we have some tools in place that we can use, because it's possible to mobilize investment. It's possible to keep together competitiveness and job creation, to have quality jobs to offer to people. It's possible to have, at the same time, to tackle inequalities and to boost internal national demand by a sort of regulated and smart redistribution of wealth in the European single market. It's possible to rebuild up an European social model that at the same time protects people, but at the same time it's also sustainable and efficient. All these elements should be the fundamental parts of a strategy to try to rebuild up Europe. Are the national politicians willing to do so? This is the big question, in my opinion.
48 hours from now, President-elect Trump will be President Trump. And I fear in the haste of preparing his inaugural address, nobody told him that we changed the title of our panel today to Fixing the European Disunion, because he gave an interview with the Times of London and Bild in which he wasn't talking about fixing European disunion, he was talking about accelerating European disunion, and he was, if I read it correctly, cheerleading for European disunion, that it's a good thing. How seriously, Commissioner, do you take the words in that interview? And this is your chance. We're live streaming. What do you say to President-elect Trump?
First, we'll see the difference between president-elect and president in function, in action, in 2 days from now. But those words have to be taken seriously. And they can also be an opportunity for Europe. I don't share what Mr. Trump said. I don't believe that Brexit is formidable. I don't believe it is an example. It is regrettable, it will create problem, and nobody should imitate that. I support Madame Merkel's immigration policy because I think that's what our values suggest. I don't believe that NATO is obsolete. In a word, I believe two things. First, that there cannot be a divide between the US and the EU that would be a major fault for history. We are allies, we are friends, we are partners, and we need to stay so. Second, when I said it's an opportunity, we, the Europeans, must be conscious that in this difficult world, with a new kind of presidency, because it will be very different, that's clear, with Russia as a threat, with China, a fragile power, with Turkey finding its ways. In this turmoil, we need to be more united than ever. I share your views, more Europe. And more Europe means also, and there I diverge with Mr. Stiglitz, and maybe I can have a short answer to him, it means also more Euro. Because there are two things I share in what you said. First, Euro has not given enough dynamics to our economies. And second, we need to have convergence and we cannot live with divergence. But there are two parameters that you underestimate in my way, and that the US in general must not underestimate. It's first that it has protected us from internal speculation, and second, that it is a factor of political unity which is absolutely decisive. So we need to have more Euro, means to me more convergence, institutional tools, policy tools, such as a budget, such as a Minister of Finance for the EU. My successor must be that finance minister. We need also to have the capacity to invest more. That's what we started to do with the Juncker plan, and especially, I agree, in education. We need to have also new kind of reforms in Europe which promote competitiveness, productivity, and innovation. But we are still a part of the world, the part of the world, where social expenditures are the higher, and when the quality of social protection is the best. So we've got still a very strong offer for our citizens, but we need to rebuild a narrative, and this narrative is not fixing disunion, it is more union. In a world when the president of the US can declare what he says, we need to be more united than ever. This year is the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome. It is no time for pause. It is no time for slowing down. It is time for accelerating. It is time for more political Europe and for more economical Europe. And there, I share also what Luca said. For that, you don't need only to have institutions which are willing to do so. You need to have all the member states acting together. And they must not let anybody divide them.
Can I?
You better, yeah, I think so.
So I agree with maybe 50, 60%. I think the better way forward for Europe is more Europe. But the distinction is that what I've argued is that if you have a single currency, you have to have a set of institutions that will enable that currency to work.
I agree.
And that when in Maastricht they didn't create those institutions, that since the beginning of the crisis, there's been some work creating it, but the central institutions still are not created. And the result of that is the kind of divergence that have been growing, and both political and economic divergence. And that, in that sense, the euro has been the basis of undermining the solidarity. So from my perspective as an outsider, somebody who very strongly supports the European project, I want to see the European project work. And if you can't get enough of the institutions to make the single currency work, it is better to leave behind the single currency and get on with the main institutions, the kind of solidarity that would make the European Union, when they founded the Treaty of Rome, there were a set of visions. A currency is just a piece of paper. It's a means to an end, not an end in itself. It was understandable that they thought maybe this currency would be help achieve greater unity. It would create greater prosperity, and that would lead to greater solidarity. In fact, because they couldn't create the institutions that would make it work, it's led to greater stagnation. That's led to more divisiveness. And so I see two roads forward, either more Europe or less Europe. There should be more Europe. But right now, the stumbling block is the creation of those institutions. And if they don't do that, it really threatens the future. And so let me just pick up one aspect of this. You're talking about competitiveness. Competitiveness would have easily been restored in the old days by just an adjustment of the exchange rate. You can't do that now. So you have Germany having larger surpluses than China, both absolutely and as a percentage of GDP. In terms of percentage of GDP, it's 4 times China's.
9%.
So
Yeah,
it is causing a global problem, but it's causing a problem for the rest of Europe. So if there is not a mechanism for dealing with this, I think you ought to face reality, and rather than having the kind of divergence and disunion, say, well, that was an interesting experiment. Currencies come and go. Let's get on with the real job of European integration, which is not just the currency.
We've got some hands up, so why don't we take advantage of those? Yes, sir, in the front row. I think we're going to try. It's on the way. Let's go to him, and then we can get to this.
I'll start with the topic of today to the Commission. If I was a 28-year-old person, which you can see I'm not, and I've been a university student and been unemployed for the last 4 years, why would I think Europe is good? I've seen 8 years of nothing, and I have a 30 to 40% unemployment. So I'm trying to be provocative. Why is Europe good for me with 30 to 40% unemployment and 4 years of unemployment since I graduated?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's normal that you wouldn't think it's good. It's what I said immediately. As long as we've got so much unemployment, and especially for the youngsters, even if we build answers such as Erasmus, and we are now celebrating the 30th anniversary of Erasmus, and we need to enlarge Erasmus to people who are also in vocational training, because all skills must be developed. As long as we've got that, and especially for the youngsters, 18% of the young under 25 are unemployed in the Eurozone. Almost 50% in Spain, more than 50% in Greece. That is just unacceptable. That's why we must raise our potential growth. And I share 50% also to 60% of what Mr. Stiglitz says. It needs to be the same, 50 to 60%. The problem is also to share the efforts. Some countries in the EU must still limitate their deficits, but others have huge surplus, as well external and fiscal, and it must be used for the common sake of the Eurozone and for our common growth.
This is not happening.
Go ahead.
This is not happening.
No, and that's why I advocate for that.
Exactly.
The Commission tried, as you know, a few weeks ago. I proposed, in the name of the Commission, that we have a euro area fiscal stance, which now should be positive. That would mean that some fiscal room of maneuver is dedicated to investment for all of us, especially in some countries, but for other countries too, and for education, for investment for the youngsters. And we need to concentrate on that, absolutely.
Let's hear from this end of the panel, and then we're going to go back to the second
very quickly. On Trump, very quickly, and then on this point. On Trump, my opinion is that nobody knows what this fellow will do.
Even his own advisors are telling us, don't take this stuff too seriously.
No, well, there are two options. The first is that this is not so serious, and that at the end, he will invest in infrastructure, he will lower the taxes, he will protect a little bit the American industries, and at least in the short term, he will create some jobs and some growth, and then we don't know what happened. On the other side, if he's serious in what he's saying, I think it's a total disaster. It's a total disaster. So I think since nobody knows what's happening, we have also to be prepared to the second part. Because if it's the first part, maybe it's good also for Europe, to be honest. If it's the second part, we have to be ready to that. That means, and I totally agree with the Commissioner, that we have to take the responsibility. We have to take the responsibility.
Incidentally, you may hear from him if Meryl Streep is any indication. He's probably not going to let that
I don't. No, well, I hope, and I think it would be the first part, the first option, but I don't know. On this point, just...
Not out of his choice, let me say. If he's moderate, it will be because Congress constrains him.
Yeah, probably.
I think you have to take him on his word, and everything we've seen since the election reinforces the view that post-inauguration will be like the election campaign.
Yeah. On Europe, very, very quickly. I agree, I said this, Europe, we have to save Europe and the euro. What we need, and coming back to your question, is that we have to try to solve the problems, the concrete problems of the people. And so we need more growth, because as I said before, the only way to create jobs is to have more growth, more investment. I think, honestly, that we need in Europe, of course, all the countries, my countries, Italy, we have to make a lot of reforms, structural reforms, we don't need enough, everything. But we need a kind of policy in Europe for anti-shocks. We need to, if there are countries where we need more investment, we have to do it there. And on this, honestly, we didn't see enough. We saw, and I agree on the fact that if there are countries that make too much deficit and debt, we have to solve that problem. But on the other hand, we really need to see more investments where we need. If we don't do this, in my opinion, we will not solve the problem of Europe.
Let's hear from Luca on this, and then go to the
I think
audience.
that is the right question, and we have to cope with that question. I mean, it's not a problem only of skills or of education. I'm not underestimating the value of this element, but there are millions and millions of young people that are very well skilled. They come out from the universities, they have absolutely a very perfect level that fits all the needs of the labor market in terms of education and skills, but they cannot find any job in the labor market. And so this is the first problem we have to tackle. The second problem is that if some of them can find a job, probably it will be a precarious job or a job in the digital informal economy, or more in general in the informal economy, with no expectation of getting a pension at the end of their career, no expectation of getting a decent salary for the work they are performing, despite of the fact that they are very well skilled and a very high level of education and competences. And then you have a third case that is, for example, a Polish miner that faces the fact that we have to change our economy to make it more sustainable in environmental terms, but this guy doesn't have any possibility to find another job in the short term in Poland or in the region where this guy is operating as a miner. So it's clear that we have to come back to the basics. The replies we need to give to people taking our responsibility, all of us in the different positions that we are covering, is what can Europe really do to provide people with jobs, with good jobs in line with their expectation and their skills? What can Europe do to make sure that the money that is stuck in profits and in the financial markets goes also to give to people better salaries, also to increase internal demand and competitiveness of our economy? And what can we do to do what Mr. Juncker, President Juncker, said in his first speech in front of the European Parliament? We want a Europe that protects people. It's true that we spend a lot of money for social protection systems and welfare systems, but the problem is that this is not effective because we are not able to protect everybody. There is no universal coverage of our welfare systems in Europe, and the divide that is going on in this respect is something that will even increase this mistrust that exists towards European and national institutions. So there is room for maneuver to do so. Job creation is the first element, but also redistribution and efficient social protection systems are also our assets. And you know, we have the money to do so. There is the Juncker plan, that's fine. But you know, we have, for example, in the European Stability Mechanism, more than 300 probably billion euros blocked there to save. We don't know exactly, because in this moment that mechanism is simply financing a little bit Greece. Why we cannot mobilize that money? That money with some kind of financial leverage could create 3 trillion investment in our economy in Europe. So let's do it.
I'm going to make a plea to audience and panel, because I've just got the sign. We've got a relatively small amount of time left, and a lot of issues have been raised. So let's do it very surgically, very quickly.
Professor Stiglitz said the EU does not have the tools, but in fact, if you think about the macro imbalance procedure, that is a tool that was never used. I don't know if it was mentioned, but it's Germany. Yes. It's blatantly in breach of excessive surpluses for, I don't know, 4 years, and yet we don't see any procedures. So my question is for Commissioner Moscovici. Do you realize, I mean, it's very sensitive to go after Germany. It is very sensitive, but from a Portuguese point of view, it is very sensitive to go after Portugal. And Portuguese people, and Portuguese people might feel that the Commission's credibility is dented if they feel there is an asymmetry.
Commissioner, briefly, and then we're going to go over here.
It's not only about procedures. Let's be clear and frank and blunt. It's about politics. Because we have got two procedures. One is the excessive deficit procedure. It's very precise, it's rules-based, and it has sanctions which are effective. And the other procedure, the macro imbalance procedure, is less effective and will be less effective as long as member states don't decide together that they've got to share the efforts, that some countries still need to reduce deficits because that's good for them. Because they cannot live with too much debt. Sorry for Italy, but I wrote yesterday to Pierre Padoan about that, and I truly believe that. But other countries, namely Netherlands and Germany, they have a lot of external surpluses and also fiscal room of maneuver. They don't need, we cannot tell them you need to invest here or there, but why not developing some mutual funds, some collective instruments to invest? The Juncker plan is about that. So it's politics, stupid also. It's not only economics.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'd like someone on the panel to comment on the imminent departure of the UK from the European Union and whether that is going to lead to more disunion or a hunkering down of those who are still in the Union.
Maybe we should take somebody who's not in the union, so that's you. But since we only have a couple minutes left, I want to ask all the panelists to very briefly touch that. And I also want you to make a quick prediction. 10 years from now, will the European Union exist as we recognize it now? And will it have more than 28 members or fewer than, let's say fewer than 25? We know we're going to lose a couple. More than 25, less than 25.
Okay.
So, Joe, you take it, but then let's hear from everybody, and I want to hear those predictions.
Sure.
Still exist, and how many?
Sure. So my reaction to Juncker's reaction to Brexit was that it showed exactly why the problems in the EU. What he said is we will be very tough and other people on anybody who exit. He didn't say we haven't done a good job of explaining the advantages of the EU. He didn't say we have to do a better job of making everybody want to belong to the EU. He said we are going to use the threat of what will happen if you leave as the incentive to stay in. To me, as an outsider, that was the wrong message. The message should have been, we want to make the EU something that people voluntarily want to stay in. And unless they change that framework, I think the EU is going to have a problem. To answer the question,
You have the UK.
I think that the EU will be around. I think, and I really hope, particularly with the growth of Trumpism, the EU is our savior on human rights, on all kinds of basic rights. So for us, it's really important that EU stay united. So, and I think it will survive, not necessarily in exactly the same form, but it will be here.
I'm getting a rather strong message from our sponsors that we need to bring it to a close. But if you've got just a second or two on each question, then we've got to wrap up.
Me? Okay.
Yeah.
So for UK, I'm very sorry that UK will not be part of EU. But honestly, maybe I don't know if the narrative was right or wrong, but for me, it's very clear that if UK wanted to control the mobility of person among Europe, among European countries, and having full access to the single market, that was for me a kind of Europe a la carte that will destroy Europe. So either if UK wanted to stay and have all the four freedom, accepting all the four freedom, that was fine. But if they didn't want to do it, they want to control it. That's what. So I'm very sorry for that, because I think we will lose a lot. UK is a competitiveness attitude and whatever. But, this is what happened. And so I think there will be also some problem for UK.
Luca, if this were the Oscars, the orchestra might be playing now. So very quickly, we've got maybe 30 seconds total.
Yeah, I will say that in the future we will be more than 27.
More.
Because there are a lot of countries that are waiting to enter.
All right.
The problem is that if we want to make a success out of it, we have to do two things. The first one is to have exactly the same narrative that Joe Stiglitz was mentioning. We need to convince people that there is an advantage in joining the European Union and being part of the European Union. And second, we have to demonstrate we are able to create 27 million new jobs.
Pierre, you get the last word, but only a couple words.
Yeah, Brexit, respectable but regrettable. It's a wake-up call for us. We need to cooperate more, because Union is the best way to cooperate for our member states. Second, of course, Europe will be there, and I can tell Joe Stiglitz that hopefully Euro will also be there, but we need to do what's necessary for it to be capable of creating convergence between our economies. 27, I would say, at least members in the Union.
There we heard.
I'm not talking 10 years, maybe 20, but that's not the end of the story.
We'll write it down. Thank you to the splendid panel. Very impressive.
Thank you.